they landed in this country, this was the new promised land. Which is why if you live on the eastern seaboard, you got about 1,000 town and city names that are Hebrew names. Jericho, Sharon, Bethlehem, Bethel. Hebrew names. And they gave Hebrew names to their kids, the Isaacs and Davids and Sarahs and Rebecca. And they made Hebrew a mandatory language at all of their universities. Princeton, right? James Madison was a Hebrew major at Princeton, and he failed. Had to repeat a grade. No kidding, he had to repeat the grade. They put Hebrew in the logo of Yale, put Hebrew in the logo of Dartmouth and Columbia. Hebrew, the new Israel. And so deeply ingrained was this notion of the United States, when it changed independence in 1783 from Great Britain. So deeply ingrained was this notion of the new Israel that there were American leaders who wanted the symbol of the new country not to be this bald eagle, but to be Moses, leading the children of Israel out of bondage into the promised land. And there was a heated debate in Congress over what would be the national symbol, this follically challenged bird or Moses. And the United States came this close to having Moses. Moses sort of got edged out by the bird. But you should know that the designers of that symbol, Moses leading the children of Israel out of bondage into the promised land, was designed by Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. That's how deeply ingrained it was. Now, many of the founding fathers and mothers of this country, as the new Israel, felt a kinship with the old Israel, us, the Jews. And they felt a close connection to the old promised land, which we call the land of Israel, and they concluded that to be good Christians and to be good Americans, it was their divinely ordained duty to help those old Jews go back to the land of their forefathers and mothers and to recreate their ancient state. And these were the restorationists, and they weren't a peripheral group in America, certainly not in post-colonial America. John Adams, the second President of the United States, said it was his fondest dream that 100,000 Jewish soldiers would march back into the Holy Land and recreate the Jewish kingdom there. Abraham Lincoln in 1863 said it was his dream that he personally could once help the Jews restore their Holy Land, their great kingdom, once he had restored the Union in the United States after the terrible Civil War. Woodrow Wilson, World War I, the grandson and son of Presbyterian ministers, was asked by the British government whether the British government should release a declaration promising what was then known as Palestine to the Jews as a national homeland. There were many people in the British government who were very divided about it. The British had great interest in the Arab world and the Muslim world. They were afraid if they issued that proclamation, they would alienate millions of Muslims within their empire. And Woodrow Wilson's own advisors, the Secretary of State, said, don't do it. We have oil interests in that area of the world. Don't do it. Woodrow Wilson overrode all of those objections. He gave his support to that declaration, the Balfour Declaration, and asked later why he did it. Woodrow Wilson had one response: to think that I, the son of the church, would have this great opportunity of restoring the Jewish people to his holy land. Imagine that. Woodrow Wilson was a restorationist. And that Balfour Declaration became the basis of the British Mandate in Palestine, which promised Palestine to the Jews as a national home. And the British Mandate, in turn, became the basis of the UN resolution, which 63 years ago today was signed, Resolution 181 of November 29, 1947, that partitioned Palestine into an independent Jewish and an independent Arab state, thus giving rise to the State of Israel. And still that role of the American spiritual tie with Israel continued. 6 months later, President Harry Truman had to decide whether to recognize the State of Israel. And all of his advisors said, don't do it. The Arabs will cut off oil to Europe. The communists will take over. His own Secretary of State, George Marshall, the most prestigious American of his generation, said, Mr. President, if you recognize this Jewish state, I will not vote for you in the 1948 presidential elections. Harry Truman, who came from a strict Baptist background, had claimed to memorize the Bible by age 14, made the United States the first country on earth to recognize the recreated Jewish state 11 minutes after Israel declared its independence on May 14, 1948. Why did he do it? He too had one answer. Asked why he recognized Israel, he had one line. He said, I'm Cyrus. I'm Cyrus. And those of you who know your Bible know that Cyrus was the ancient Persian king who rescued the Jews from exile and restored them to their Holy Land. I'm Cyrus. Now, since Truman's time, many American presidents who came from a similarly observant background, that background has influenced their policies toward Israel, whether it be President Johnson or President Clinton, President Nixon, George Bush. Many of them have been influenced by their spiritual ties to Israel, and especially in the United States. You know, support for Israel in this country is very, very high. Very high. It varies between about 57 and 62%, sometimes as high as 67% of the American population defines itself as pro-Israel. But among churchgoers, and America is the most religiously observant, industrialized state in the world, among churchgoers, it's 82%. Much higher. So a great spiritual connection binds these two states together. The idea of a united state, the idea of America is virtually indistinguishable from the idea of a recreated Jewish state. But then that state was recreated, May 1948, and Israel comes into being. And it comes into being not just as any state, but it comes into being as a democratic state. And not only any democratic state, but the only democratic state in the Middle East. The only state that shares America's passionate freedom of assembly and free speech. The rights of minorities. In Israel, we have Arab members of Knesset, an Arab judge on our Supreme Court. The rights of women. The rights of gays and lesbians. We have gay and lesbian refugees from the Arab world living in Israel because it's the only place they can find sanctuary in the entire region. A country that offers shelters to Muslim refugees from Bosnia and from Darfur, the only country in the Middle East that has an open border with Africa. All of this became part and parcel of the fabric of the U.S.-Israel relationship. But then there was still no strategic relationship. We think of the United States and Israel being so strategically connected, our militaries, our intelligence systems. That didn't exist. That did not exist before 1967. Israel fought a war that year. You might remember it, the 1967 Six-Day War. And we fought that war without any American munitions, none whatsoever. But it was on the aftermath of that war, on the seventh day, if you would, that the president at the time, Lyndon Johnson, woke up and realized that there was a powerhouse in the Middle East. And the United States was deeply engaged in the Cold War at the time, and he said to his advisors, we have to be allied with this country. We have to create an American-Israel strategic alliance. And so it was born. And it was born, and it became one of the deepest and most multifaceted strategic alliances that this country, the United States, has had with any foreign country in its post-World War II period, and it has many different ramifications, many different areas. It's in intelligence sharing, on information regarding our common threats. It's in weapons development. The United States and Israel today are developing, among other systems, some of the most advanced anti-ballistic defense systems in the world. The Arrow 3, the Arrow 2, the David Sling, the Iron Dome systems that will provide not only multi-layered protection to Israel's population from incoming enemy missiles, but protection also for American forces serving in the Middle East and elsewhere. Our forces train together. We have joint maneuvers. And Israeli technologies and armaments have saved untold American lives in the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. You know, there's a little kibbutz in northern Israel, and it was founded by Americans in the 1940s, a great little kibbutz. That kibbutz has a little factory, and in that little factory they have produced armor. And in that armor has now provided armor for 9,000 American combat vehicles in the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, protecting the men and women inside those vehicles from improvised explosive devices that have proved so murderous in these conflicts. Israel has saved thousands of American lives. Now, most of this I knew before entering my position as ambassador. Again, I had spent 3 decades studying this. And then I got into this job about a year and a half ago. Feels like about 20. and realized, rather humblingly, that I knew relatively little. That the U.S.-Israel relationship was far vaster and much deeper than anything I had contemplated or studied before. For example, I knew nothing about the commercial ties between the United States and Israel. This morning, I spoke at the Chamber of Commerce, and I went into some detail about those commercial ties, but I'll give you the short version. Israel today is America's 20th largest customer in the world, believe it or not. The United States does more business with the state of Israel than it does with Argentina, than it does with Russia, than it does with Saudi Arabia. And again, the commercial ties are in so many different areas. It is in the cooperation of high tech. Israel has more startups, more scientific patents, more Nobel Prizes than any country per capita in the world. Israel is the second most representative country on the NASDAQ exchange after the United States. Some of you have cell phones. Some of them may be turned off. But if you take out those cell phones and look at those screens, or go home and look at your computer screen on your laptop or your desktop, 70% of those screens are made in the state of Israel. Chances are you have an Israeli product inside your computers. Every single one of your computers has Israeli products inside, because the R&D centers for Motorola, for Intel, for Google, are all located in the state of Israel.